Maybe we can start with Kiri. Gerald pondered for a moment and said, they should investigate Kiri if the matter was related to Mason, because it was Kiri who suggested that Mason should be expelled from the family back then. Moreover, it seemed that Kiri benefited the most from that event. After Mason left the Kenneth family, he took over the company that Mason was in charge of at that time. But Gerald knew that Kiri did not have such abilities. There must be someone else behind. If he investigated Kiri, it would lead him to more things. Thinking of this, Gerald touched his nose. At this time, his phone suddenly rang. Gerald picked up the phone. He found that it was Audrey calling. Hello. Gerald answered the phone and said, Hey, Gerald, how could you do this to me? Audrey said, you came to Sacramento and didn't tell me. I am your superior. Do you still want to keep your job? Obviously, Audrey did not know that Gerald had quit the job. Just as he was about to speak, Audrey smiled and said, Kiera, Hazel and I are together. Why don't you come to see us and treat us to a meal? All right, Gerald said, pick a restaurant. I'll go to see you. Okay, I'll send you the restaurant's address through line later, Audrey said with a smile. After hanging up the phone, Audrey quickly sent him an address. Gerald hailed a taxi and rushed towards the restaurant. When he arrived, he walked into the restaurant and found Audrey, Kiera, and Hazel. When Audrey saw Gerald, she glared at him and said, Why did you come to Sacramento? I've got something to do here. Gerald smiled and said, You've chosen a very expensive restaurant. Of course, I want a big meal. You are a rich man with a diamond card from New Bank. Audrey glared at Gerald and then picked up the menu. Hazel and Kiera smiled and then greeted Gerald. Gerald could only sit down. Looking at Audrey, who was ordering food, he said, Hey, Audrey. Actually, I have resigned. Audrey was surprised. She looked up at Gerald. She frowned and asked, When did you resign? Why didn't my father tell me? Gerald poured a cup of tea and said, I resigned yesterday, but Mr. Herman wants me to tell you personally. I think that's why he adds by pub future. Didn't tell you. All right. Audrey lowered her head and continued to read the menu, but there was a hint of disappointment in her eyes. When Audrey saw that Gerald had a diamond card, she knew that he wouldn't work there for a long time. Audrey didn't know that Gerald had been protecting her, so she didn't know why Gerald would suddenly become her assistant. However, Audrey was optimistic. After a short moment of disappointment, she continued to order food. After Audrey finished, she looked up at Gerald and asked, By the way, you've come to Sacramento. You will attend Doreen's engagement banquet. Right. Gerald shook his head. Alas. Speaking of Doreen, I feel sorry for her. I didn't expect her to marry Henley, Audrey said. The tragedies of wealthy families. I will definitely not sacrifice for my father's business. I will marry someone for love. As Audrey brought up the topic, Kiera hurriedly nodded. Yes, Henley had been pursuing Doreen back at university. Doreen had never looked him in the eye. She found him annoying. Moreover, Henley was messing around with other women at the same time. He is a playboy, but something has happened to Doreen's family. There's nothing she could do if her family has decided to sacrifice her. You saw it yesterday. Henley's friends are disgusting. They actually touched Kiera in front of us, and Henley. Audrey thought of how Tyrone had touched Kiera's leg yesterday. She looked angry. Gerald raised his eyebrows and asked, Someone touched M's Bender. Hazel nodded and said, Yes. It's an internet celebrity who live streams. His name is Tyrone Cooper. Hearing this name, Gerald paused. Then he asked, Is he the man that is always fashionably dressed? Right. That's him. He live streams to sell goods, mostly cosmetics. He seems to have many female followers. Some young women are really obsessed with him. Audrey scolded, If he was in Los Angeles, I would have slapped him directly. You know him too? Kiera asked. When I came to Sacramento, he was sitting next to me, Gerald said. Anyway, he's disgusting. Doreen is going to marry Henley. It's Audrey sighed. Gerald rubbed his nose and did not speak. While they were talking, two people walked into the restaurant. It was Tyrone and a young man dressed in a trendy way. Welcome. A waiter greeted them. When she saw Tyrone, her Eyes lit up and she asked, "Are you Tyrone?" Tyrone's face revealed a trace of pride, and then he said, "Shush. I'm keeping a low profile. My friend and I are here to eat. This is the son of the Kenneth family, Justin Kenneth. May I ask if you want to eat in a private room or in the hall?" The waiter hurriedly said. Tyrone was just about to answer when he suddenly noticed Audrey and the others. He said, "Justin, look over there. Those 3 women. They've come from Los Angeles to attend Doreen's engagement banquet. Pipe pipe." Justin's expression changed slightly. He looked over, and then he got excited. Because Gerald sat with his back to the door, they did not see Gerald's face. "How is it? I wasn't bragging. Right. They are all top beauties." Tyrone licked his lips and said, "They are indeed quite beautiful." Justin swallowed and said to the waiter, "We want the table next to them." The waiter nodded and said, "All right. This way please." Tyrone and Justin were brought over. Tyrone looked at them and pretended to be surprised. "Wow, aren't you the 3 beauties from Los Angeles? What a coincidence. I didn't expect to run into you here." Hearing the voice, Gerald and the others subconsciously looked over. Audrey and the other 2 women instantly frowned. When Tyrone and Justin saw Gerald, they were stunned. "It's you, Gerald." Smiling face. "Casual date is just a click away." Right. Gerald and Justin were both young men from the Kenneth family. They were relatives and knew each other. However, Gerald was a distant relative to Justin, and his status in the family was not so high. Therefore, Gerald wouldn't become an heir to the family. However, Justin was different. He was younger than Gerald. Justin was a direct descendant, and his father was the eldest son of his grandfather. And Justin's elder brother, Cole, was an heir first in line to the Kenneth family. As one of the heirs, Justin would get some shares when it was time to inherit the Kenneth family's properties. "So, you are Gerald, the rapist." Tyrone looked at Gerald and sneered, "No wonder you didn't dare to tell me your name when we were on the plane. It turns out that you were ashamed. After all, your name is too well known in Sacramento." As Tyrone spoke, he looked at Audrey and the others and said, "Beauties, you should not hang out with this kind of person. You should make friends with decent and powerful people. Let me introduce one to you. The person next to me is Justin. He's from the Kenneth family. He is one of the heirs of his family." Justin revealed a smile and said, "Hello, beauties. May I have lunch with you?" As Justin spoke, he made a gentlemanly gesture. Not interested, Audrey curled her lip and said. Tyrone frowned and said, "Justin personally invited you to dinner, and you actually refused. You are so rude. You are in Sacramento, not your little city, Los Angeles." Audrey's expression changed slightly, and a hint of fear appeared on her face. Gerald exhaled. He looked at Tyrone and Justin and said, "Go away. Okay. Seeing you will affect your appetite." Gerald's voice was not loud, but Tyrone and Justin clearly heard it clearly. Everyone was stunned. Audrey and the other 2 women were also shocked. They knew Gerald's background, and they basically knew what kind of power the Kenneth family had in Los Angeles and how large its business empire was. Therefore, after Tyrone reminded Audrey that she was in Sacramento, she did not dare to retort. If they were in Los Angeles, Audrey would have scolded him coldly. But now that she was in Sacramento, she did not dare to do that, because it was easy for the Kenneth family to make things difficult for Forever Group. They didn't expect that Gerald would retort Tyrone, and his attitude was very tough. Tyrone couldn't believe it and kept silent. He just looked at Gerald in shock. On the contrary, Justin responded immediately. He narrowed his eyes slightly and gave a faint smile. Justin looked at Gerald and said, "Are you talking to me? 9 years ago, you would be scared every time you saw me. But you were so rude just now. Is that because you've spent 9 years in prison? Do you feel that you are awesome because you came out and saw that your father is now the vice president of Universe Group?" Justin sneered, "I think it would be rather easy for the Kenneth family to let Universe Group fire a vice president in Sacramento." Gerald pushed the chair away and stood up. He looked at Justin and said faintly, "You and go and try it. Let's see if Universe Group will fire my father." "And stop buzzing like a mosquito here." Gerald picked his ears and said disdainfully. Seeing that Gerald and Justin were both angry, the manager quickly came over and said, Mr. Kenneth, this is a public place. We have prepared a private room for you. How about going there to have your meal? Justin ignored him. He stared at Gerald and said, all right, Gerald. To show some respect to the manager, I won't argue with you here, but I won't forget what happened today. Since you've returned to Sacramento, we have plenty of time to deal with our problem. Gerald smiled and said, right. There's plenty of time. HMPH. Justin sneered and followed the manager to the private room. Tyrone gloated and said, Gerald, I didn't like you when I saw you on the plane. Now that you provoked Justin, you are in trouble. Remember my name. I'm Tyrone. We'll soon see each. Ads by Pub Future. Other again. After he finished, Tyrone followed Justin to the private room. Gerald smiled disdainfully and sat down. And, just as he sat down, he found that the three women were looking at him in shock. Audrey gave Gerald a thumbs up. Said, awesome. You actually dare to talk to a member of the Kenneth family like that. Hazel wasn't surprised. She had seen Gerald fighting before. Although she had never mentioned it to anyone, she was not worried about Gerald at all. Kiera frowned and sighed, Gerald, the Kenneth family is not easy to deal with. If they try to hurt you, take your bank card and go to new bank. No one dares to hurt you there, even if they are from the Kenneth family. Gerald nodded and smiled. He wasn't worried at all. Then he thought of something and looked at Kiera. He asked, by the way, Ems, Bender, do you want to transfer to Sacramento to work? Kiera's expression changed. Of course, I want to. I haven't told you, right? Actually, Sacramento is my hometown. But after I was hired by New Bank, I was assigned to Los Angeles. It is actually quite difficult to transfer to New Bank. It would take several years. Are you going to use your authority to get me here? Gerald nodded and said, well, I like to keep a low profile. I want only one person from New Bank to communicate with. One. It had been very pleasant to work with you. So, you can go to New Bank with my card to talk to them. And if you need me to go with you, I will go. When Audrey heard that, she curled her lips and said, I really didn't see that you were Loki. Gerald rubbed his nose. Kiera said excitedly, no need. I just need to show them your card. There were only 9 diamond cards in the world. And it gave the user clearance to many things in New Bank. Gerald smiled. The card was linked to his line, so to him, it was not a big problem if the card was with him. Gerald took out the card from his pocket and handed it to Kiera. Kiera took it carefully and then put it into her purse. Audrey looked at the card with envy on her face and then ordered a few more expensive dishes. Without the disturbance from others, the meal was quite enjoyable. When they finished eating, Audrey's phone rang. It was a call from Doreen. She asked them to hang out with her. After saying goodbye to each other, Gerald slipped away alone. Kiera was in a hurry to go to New Bank for her transfer, so she left early. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Only Audrey and Hazel were left. They took a taxi to Doreen's place. After the 3 women left, Gerald showed up and touched his nose. He planned to take a taxi home to sleep. And he would go to see Kerry to learn about the situation back then. But his phone suddenly rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Gerald picked up the phone and said, hello, sir. I am Eric, the person in charge of Sacramento. Mr. Slater asked me to contact you, said Eric politely. Before coming to Sacramento, Gerald said that he would help them solve the problem of the warehouse. Gerald nodded and said, I know. How about this? Add me online and send me all the information you have. Then you just wait for me to solve it. Okay. Eric nodded. Then he hung up the phone. Eric sent a copy of the information to Gerald. Gerald naturally did not intend to solve it in person. This was a small matter. He will let Leandro do it. So, Gerald sent the information to Leandro. After briefing him, Gerald put away his phone. Gerald originally planned to go home, but he suddenly remembered that Jessica had invited him to dinner tonight. He touched his nose and looked to the side. He saw an internet cafe and decided to play games for a while. In an apartment in Los Angeles, Eric sat on the sofa at home and hung up the phone. Eric was handsome. He had a brush cut. After hanging up the phone, he looked straight ahead and said, "Master, he said that I can just leave the matter to him. What is our mission today?" "Kill Blood Lotus." The person opposite him said that without any emotions. It was a girl. She seemed to be around 25 years old. And she was very small. She was only about 5 feet tall and had a baby face. However, her chest was unusually plump. She had short hair. There was no expression on her face and no emotions in her eyes. On the table in front of her were 2 knives, one long and one short. There was a photo in her hand. In the photo were 2 people, one man and one woman. The woman was her. In sharp contrast to the girl at present, she had a very bright smile in the photo. She was lying on the back of a man, who had a blade of grass in his mouth. The sunlight was very fierce, shining on them. The man curled the corner of his mouth with a trace of arrogance and disdain. The man was Gerald. "Master, it has been 3 years since I saved you and came to Sacramento. I am so powerful now. I rank 5th among the underground assassins. It's a waste of talent for me to kill people of Blood Lotus. Red card assassins there are so weak. I want to kill what you mentioned before. When will we go back tonight?" "Watch," Eric said with a sad face. "Most importantly, I don't want to go to work anymore." The girl looked up at him and said in a cold tone, "Until we find him. I survived. He wouldn't have died." Looking at the lady's expression, Eric curled his lips and said, "Master, I saw that battle with my own eyes. You were besieged by so many masters, and he was the main target. The pressure he suffered was much greater than yours. If I were not strong back then, I'm afraid I would not be able to save you." Although you said that he was very fierce, the chance of him escaping is very slim. As soon as Eric finished speaking, the lady suddenly raised her head and looked at him. "I was joking. You're like him," Eric quickly said. The lady sneered, "It has nothing to do with you." "I really don't want to go to work," Eric said with a sad face. "When you return to night watch, you will be super rich." "I don't want to work hard. I will go back when I find him," the lady said in a cold tone. Eric muttered, "But when will we find him? If he dies, I will have to work hard to support you for a lifetime. That's suffering." The lady sighed and carefully hid the photo close to her. She glanced at Eric and said, "Go to sleep now. You will still have to operate at night. Remember to keep a low profile." "I know. If I didn't keep a low profile, I would have beaten that warehouse owner. Damn it, how dare he boss me around. I'm the 5th greatest killer in the underground. It pissed me off," Eric cursed. The lady ignored him and picked up the 2 knives on the coffee table. Eric quickly said, "Master, when are you going to give me 2 knives like these? It's so awesome to carry them on my back and show them to the crowd. All I am using now are daggers that you got from Blood Lotus. Don't let me repeat it again. Watchman are low-key. We are not carrying such knives to show off." The lady frowned and said, "When we go back, you can do that at night watch." After that, she returned to her room and closed the door. Gerald played games in the internet cafe for the whole afternoon. When it was almost 4 o'clock, Jessica called him. Gerald picked up the phone and said, "Hello." "Hello." On the other side of the line, Jessica sounded a bit awkward. "Gerald, I am sorry. We planned to have dinner tonight, but I left Sacramento for a while. I have so many things to do that I'm afraid I can't spare some time tonight." Gerald was stunned for a moment. He had made an appointment with Jessica and her mother 3 times, but they always stood him up. However, he didn't care. Gerald smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. I will stay in Sacramento for a long time. Let's meet again after you are done with your work. I am very sorry. If you need my help in Sacramento, just call me. I will definitely help you," Jessica said. At this time, Gerald heard someone calling Jessica's name on the phone. Gerald smiled and said, "Okay, if there is anything you need my help with, please call me. Just go busy with your work." Jessica politely apologized again and then hung up the phone. Ads by Pub Future. Gerald did not think much of it and played the game until midnight. At midnight, He walked out of the internet cafe and looked up at the dark night sky. He murmured, I haven't operated so late at night in a long time. I miss it. As he spoke, he walked toward a community. It was not difficult to find Kyrie's residence. Before Gerald came here, he had already checked Kyrie's residence. Although Kyrie was in charge of a company in the Kenneth family, he couldn't afford to live in a mansion. Kyrie lived in a high-end residential area, and his house was a mansion. Gerald avoided all the cameras and arrived at the door of Kyrie's house. However, Gerald said with a frown, no one is here. Gerald did not hear any breathing sounds in the room, which confused him. It seems that I will have to come here again tomorrow. Gerald sighed and left the community. Kyrie's residence was by the riverside of Sacramento. Gerald walked by the river. After walking for a while, he suddenly saw something on the beach and narrowed his eyes slightly. Then, he was shocked and hurried to the beach. After approaching, Gerald saw a large amount of blood on the ground, and a corpse was on the ground. Gerald's expression changed. He was considering whether to call the police. But the moment he got close, Gerald noticed that there was a lotus tattoo on the back of the man's hand. He took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The lotus was red. Red card assassin is dead, he thought. Gerald lowered his head, and his eyes suddenly flashed with joy. He said with ecstasy, Watchman number 2 did it. Watchman number 2 was Gerald's closest comrade in arms and best friend in night watch. Gerald trusted her the most. Knowing that she might still be alive, Gerald was very happy. But now he was sure that Watchman number 2 was indeed alive. Gerald's joy was beyond description. After that, he sighed with relief, took out his phone, and called Valerie. The phone was quickly connected. Valerie's lazy voice came over and asked, Hey, what's wrong? I found Watchman No. 2. Gerald quickly said. What? There was a hint of excitement in Valerie's voice as she asked, Really? Where is she now? I didn't see her, but I saw the corpse. He's from Blood Lotus. He was killed by Watchman No. 2. Gerald said in one breath. We found 2 corpses last time. Although the killing technique is very similar to Watchman number 2, it was not done by her. Are you sure that it's her this time? Valerie asked again. Yes, I'm pretty sure, Gerald said seriously. I'll send you the location. Send the people from Sacramento to come over and deal with the corpse. All right. Valerie nodded. We have to find her. Got it. Gerald licked his lips and said, I know. I still want to fight side by side with her. After hanging up the phone, Gerald took a breath. He looked at the river and said with a slight smile, It's good that you are smiling face. Casual date is just a click away. Still alive. You don't want to go back because you want to seek revenge. After all, when you return to night watch, there will be endless tasks. With that, he let out a breath and left. What Gerald did not notice was that a woman in a red dress was standing 1,000 feet away from him by the river. She looked at Gerald below and smiled sinisterly. She licked her red lips and said, Here, I told you that you couldn't escape from 1. You will be taught a hard lesson by me in bed sooner or later. The next day, Gerald was woken up by Jacob's phone call. He sat up, found the phone, and said, Hey, I'm still sleeping. It's 10 o'clock. It's Saturday today. Have you forgotten something? Jacob said snappily. Saturday. So what? Gerald said sleepily. If there is nothing else, I will go back to sleep now. Shit. Didn't you promise Kian that you would attend the class reunion? Jacob scolded. Gerald then remembered that he didn't have the habit of checking the calendar. When Kian said that they would have a class reunion on Saturday, Gerald thought that there would still be a few days to go. But it was the next day. Oh, I got it. I'll see you at the entrance of the hotel in half an hour, Gerald said. After hanging up the phone, Gerald got up and simply washed 1. Then, he felt a bit depressed. He had bought a set of smart clothes in the mall before. He had worn them for 2 days, so his mother had washed them in the morning. Therefore, Gerald could only wear relatively old but decent clothes and went to the hotel. When he arrived at the entrance of Felicity Hotel, he saw Jacob, who was in a suit. Damn it, why did you dress like this? Jacob saw Gerald's appearance and stared at him. Don't you remember how arrogant Kian was? You will be ridiculed by him. Gerald was a little helpless. He coughed dryly, then looked at Jacob and said seriously, watchmen have to keep a low profile. This is the rule of night watch. You have to remember it. I only know that being low-key will be made fun of. Jacob rolled his eyes at Gerald and said, forget it, let's go in. Soon, they walked toward the hotel. Just as they arrived, they saw 3 people standing at the entrance of the hotel, greeting each other. 2 of them were Kian and Dia. They were the organizers of this reunion, so they had to greet the guests. The other one was Andrew. Hey, the monitor is now one of the marketing directors of Universe Group. His annual salary is $160,000. Andrew said happily. Kian said politely, I dare not compare with the hire. You are from the Zumtor family. I was just a little lucky and was born into a rich family. Andrew said, by the way, do you still remember Gerald Kenneth? He was doing well in study and was admitted to Sacramento University, but then he was arrested for rape. I met him 2 days ago. He has been released. I know. I met him yesterday. He and Jacob came to our company for an interview. Kian said disdainfully, Jacob didn't even go to a formal university. How dare he want to work in Universe Group? That's ridiculous. During the conversation, Dia nudged Kian with her elbow and signaled him to look into the distance. Kian looked over and found that Gerald and Jacob were walking over. Kian did not care if his words were heard by Gerald and the others. He smiled at Andrew and said, speak of the devil. Gerald and Jacob heard their conversation. Jacob looked angry, but he could not refute it. He had not yet joined Universe Group. He had digested the information after a day and took the initiative to contact Leandro and discussed his work. As the director of the marketing department, he was 2 levels higher than Kian. He was Kian's immediate superior. Kian was almost at the most basic management in Universe Group, but he had not yet assumed office, so he was nothing now. Seeing the 2, Andrew also showed a trace of a sneer and said, Gerald, you really came. In a while, our female classmate have to stay away from you. If you take a fancy to someone, just drug her. As he spoke, he looked at Kian and said, Kian, you have to take care of your wife. Kian frowned. Dia looked at Gerald and then said, you guys go in first. I have booked 2 connected private rooms. Andrew said, I will also receive the other students here. He looked at Gerald and said, otherwise, when I go in with Gerald later, the other students will think that we are birds of a feather. It is not good. Anger flashed across Jacob's face. At this time, Andrew also looked at Jacob and said, well, by the way, Jacob, I heard that your girlfriend asked you for $160,000 as a betrothal gift. Actually, she was weighing your potential. Otherwise, she wouldn't have demanded such a huge amount. Stay away from Gerald and I'll recommend a job to you. If you work harder, it's easy to earn at least $3,200 a month. Jacob was a little unable to hold back his disgust. Gerald pulled Jacob and said, let's go in. Jacob snorted and walked inside. After asking the waiter, they entered the private room. There were more than a dozen people in the private room. The men and women were all familiar to Gerald. After seeing Gerald and Jacob, everyone was stunned for a moment. Their expressions were strange, especially when they saw Gerald. Their eyes all showed disdain. In this world, rape was the most despised thing. They did not greet them, and no one called Gerald to sit down. They just looked at him with disdain. When Jacob was a student, he was quite cheerful. So he took the initiative to greet others. Those people only nodded politely to him, but they did not have any intention to continue greeting them. They probably saw. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Jacob and Gerald walking together and didn't want to interact with them. Jacob was a little embarrassed, but Gerald looked indifferent. He touched his nose and chose a table with fewer people to sit by. When the others saw Gerald sit down, their expressions all changed. Among them, a slightly fat woman looked at Gerald and said in a strange tone, Gerald, you should come to this gathering. You are so thick-faced. Aren't you afraid of ruining the atmosphere? Jacob frowned and said, Rhoda, don't go too far. Ho ho, did I? Rhoda sneered and said, everyone knows what kind of person Gerald is. We also know how he was jailed. When such a scum comes here, all the girls will be afraid. What do you know, Gerald? Jacob still wanted to explain, but Gerald quickly stopped him. Then, he smiled at Rhoda and said, well, don't worry. You are very safe. I have no interest in homely girls like you. Jacob smiled and said, yes, he won't choose you even if he wants to rape you. You make him feel sick. You can't arouse his sexual desire. Why don't you examine yourself in the mirror? You. Rhoda was stunned, and then her eyes suddenly turned red. For a woman, these words were too harsh. Beside her, a man couldn't stand it anymore. He frowned and said, Jacob, Gerald, we are all classmates. What you said is too much. Jacob was about to refute, but at this time, another man hurriedly stood up and said, everyone should talk less. Rhoda, you can sit in my seat. I will go over and sit with them. Gerald is now out of prison. Even if he committed a crime, he has been punished. We should not be biased against him. Gerald looked at him. This person looked honest. His name was Benning Cobb. When he was in high school, he was an honest and average student. He didn't talk much and was often bullied. The most typical thing was that he once liked Dia and secretly wrote a love letter to her. Then, Dia read it in front of the whole class. After reading it, she mocked him. Since then, he became even more self-centered in class and was less conspicuous. However, it could be seen that he had changed a lot and seemed to be more tactful since he had worked. As he spoke, Benning took the initiative to move aside and sat by Gerald's table. He smiled at Gerald and Jacob and said, Gerald, Jacob, nice to meet you. However, the others who shared the same table with Gerald all left. Nobody paid attention to them and began to talk to each other. Most of the time, they were chatting about work, income, the brands of the clothes they were wearing, and the brands of the smiling face. Casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Bags they were carrying. In short, whether intentionally or not, they were all doing a comparison. Gerald, how long have you been out of prison? What do you do? At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. Gerald looked over and found that it was Andrew. He did not know when this guy had returned. Many people also looked over. They all had faint smiles on their faces. I didn't go to work, Gerald said calmly. Unemployed. Andrew sneered and said, why don't you ask Benning to recommend you to be a delivery man? Our high school is quite outstanding. Benning is the only delivery man in our class. When the others heard this, they also revealed a faint smile. Benning's face turned slightly red in embarrassment. Gerald raised his eyebrows slightly and said lightly, what's wrong with delivery men? At the very least, they can fend for themselves. That's true, Andrew said. Then he looked at Jacob and asked, Jacob, Kian said that you went to Universe Group for an interview yesterday. Everyone looked at Jacob in surprise. Jacob nodded and said, yes, what's wrong? I remember that you are a junior college graduate. Universe Group only recruits graduates from key universities, and it is quite difficult to be admitted. Andrew said, did you pass the interview? Jacob showed a proud look and said, of course. I will go to work on Monday. At this time, Kian and Dia came in from the door. He looked at Jacob and said, Jacob, it's boring to brag like this. We are all classmates. You don't have a good job, and no one will discriminate against you. I am a manager at Universe Group, and I have a good relationship with the HR department. I went to ask the interviewer yesterday and was told that no interviewee was called Jacob. Haha. Andrew laughed, and someone beside him laughed. Jacob's face was red, and he gritted his teeth. It was Mr. Hansen who personally interviewed me. When it comes to bragging, you are the best. Andrew said, when you were in high school, you bragged every day, but now you still brag like this. How important Mr. Hansen is. Would he come to interview you, a junior college graduate? Jacob's face became even redder. Indeed, logically speaking, this was too inconceivable. Even Jacob himself felt that it was equally inconceivable. If he had not experienced it himself, he would feel that it was bragging. Gerald smiled and said, "Forget it, don't bother with them. They are nearsighted people. Think about your current identity, why bother with them?" Jacob nodded. He looked at Kian deeply, looking forward to how brilliant Kian's expression would be when he appeared at the company on Monday. In the private room, Jacob took a look at Kian, sat down, and ignored him. Kian looked at Jacob with a sneer and said, "Next time you brag, remember to brag about something that everyone can. Except, you shouldn't have bragged that Mr. Hansen personally interviewed you. It simply makes us laugh our ass off." Jacob no longer paid attention to him. Under the mocking gazes of everyone, he became calmer. Seeing that Jacob did not speak, Kian chuckled and clapped his hands. "Almost everybody is present. Doreen is on the way. Here now. She will be here soon. I will let the waiter serve the dishes first." Then he thought of something and said, "Oh, by the way, let's split the bill. About $500 each." As he spoke, he looked towards Gerald and said, "Gerald, you guys have earned a lot this time. The three of you share table." Gerald smiled and said to him, "Makes sense." Then he turned his head. Benning quietly looked at the two and smiled a little naively. "If I had known that they would mock me like this, I wouldn't have come here. I think we are classmates, so I came together." Gerald smiled slightly. "Don't care about those people. They don't have much money but pretend to be rich. We can enjoy our own meal." Benning nodded. Then, he looked at Gerald curiously and asked, "By the way, Gerald, if you don't have a job now, why don't you deliver takeout with me? I'll recommend you." Gerald was a little moved. In this fickle society, Benning could still maintain some kindness and purity. It was really rare. He shook his head and said, "There's no need. I run a small business myself." Beside him, the corner of Jacob's mouth twitched. If Universe Group was considered a small business, he really didn't know what a big business was. Whoosh! At this time, the door of the private room suddenly opened. Gerald looked up at the door. A few beautiful figures appeared. At the door, the one who took the lead was Doreen in a white dress. She still had that indifferent look. When she entered the room and saw Kian, she smiled and said, "Is it okay for me to bring a few friends with me?" Hiss. At this time, a wave of gasps sounded in the room, and many people looked shocked. Yes, the girls who came with Doreen were Audrey, Hazel, and Kiera. When the four beauties stood together, it was enough to ads by Pub Future attract the attention of any man. Even the most beautiful girl was overshadowed. Kian was also stunned for a moment, then quickly nodded and said, "Of course. To be able to see so many beauties, you can see how excited these beasts are." Doreen revealed a smile, and then her eyes fell on the empty table shared by the three not far away. Seeing Gerald sitting there, she paused. "Come, Doreen, please sit here. I specially reserved a seat for you," Kian said. In fact, only 20 people had come to this gathering. Kian had booked 3 tables. It was not a problem for 10 people to share one table. Audrey and her friends also noticed Gerald. Audrey was stunned and walked to Gerald and patted him on the shoulder. She said, "Gerald, why are you here?" The others were shocked. They had never expected that the beauty Doreen had brought knew Gerald. In particular, the male students all looked envious. "Doreen, I will sit by Gerald," Audrey said to Doreen with a smile. Doreen nodded and then said to Kian, "It's a little crowded. I'll sit over there too." As she spoke, she waved at Kiera and Hazel and walked over to Gerald, pulled out a chair, and sat down. The people at the other 2 tables were completely stunned. The 4 beauties all ran to Gerald. At first, they discriminated against Gerald and wanted to isolate Gerald and Jacob, but they never expected that Gerald and Jacob would take advantage of them. "Damn it." Kian cleared his throat and said, "Let's talk." Nevertheless, everyone was faintly looking at Gerald and the others. When they saw Kiera and Hazel talking and laughing with Gerald, they were even more jealous. They did not know how Gerald knew them, but to be able to know these beauties at the same time, even if they didn't win their hearts, was already something for them to show off. Doreen looked at Gerald and frowned. She calmly said, "You should not have returned to Sacramento." Gerald asked, "Why? My brother will not let you go." Doreen pursed her lips and said, "Moreover, he already knows that you have returned to Sacramento. Bree will not let you go, and her husband." Gerald shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't care." When Doreen saw Gerald like this, a complicated look flashed through her eyes. Then, she revealed a bitter smile and said, "Up to you." Hazel frowned at this time. "Gerald, why don't you come back to Los Angeles with us? There are too many people here who hate you. Justin from the Kenneth family probably won't let you go." The people they mentioned made Jacob and Benning a little confused. They were naturally unable to come into contact with these top-rich second generation in Sacramento. Gerald waved his hand and said, "I have something to do in Sacramento." Doreen looked at Gerald and said nothing more. At this time, Andrew came over with a glass of wine. He walked to Doreen and said with a smile, "Two beauties in our class, one was ruined by Kian, and the other will be married to the first in line heir of the Zumthor family. Congratulations, you will be engaged tomorrow. Speaking of which, after you and Henley get married, we are relatives." Doreen smiled and picked up a glass of juice on the table. She nodded and said, "Thank you." There was no joy in her tone. Slowly, some people began to move towards Doreen. Doreen also smiled and returned the greetings, but her tone was neither cold nor warm, and there was not much joy. After a while, Andrew laughed and got up. Leaning against Gerald, he said, "By the way, our classmate Gerald also came today." Benning was right. We should not be biased against him. Although he once raped someone, it doesn't matter. He had been jailed for 9 years. We should give him a chance to start over. He emphasized the words, "start over." Then he walked to Gerald's side and said happily, "Gerald, you haven't worked yet, right? In the past, you were one of the straight A students in our class. You still have a lot of potential. Do you want to come to my company to work?" "Andrew, you are too kind," Rhoda said from the side. Andrew smiled and said, "We are all classmates. It is fine to take care of him. Of course, you were a criminal. I can't offer you a decent job. It is not fair to other employees. You are not a graduate either, so you can only be a security guard. Of course, since we are classmates, I'll pay you higher than other security guards. You can afford to live in Sacramento." Audrey and the others frowned. Hazel and Kiera both looked at Andrew. Andrew thought that the two had a good impression of him, so he continued to pat Gerald on the shoulder and said, "How is it? Do you want to come?" "No need." Gerald curled his lips and said. Next to him, Rhoda said, "Gerald, don't be silly. It is very difficult for a person like you to find a job in this society." Sigh, "Forget it. Everyone has different pursuits." Andrew looked at Gerald and said, "If you miss out on this opportunity, I won't help you even if you beg me next time." Beside him, Kiera seemed to be unable to stand it any longer. She raised her eyebrows, took out a bank card, and handed it to Gerald, saying, "By the way, Gerald, yesterday you gave me this card and asked me to quit my job at New Bank's branch in Los Angeles and work in Sacramento. I forgot to give you the bank card." Everyone looked at the bank card strangely. When Henley saw this card, his pupils shrank, and his hand trembled slightly. The wine glass in his hand suddenly fell to the ground. Diamond card," he gasped and said in shock. Seeing this diamond card, Gerald frowned slightly. He probably knew what Kiera was thinking. Seeing that he was despised by these people, she couldn't bear it. What Andrew said pissed Kiera off. It just so happened that she had Gerald's diamond card and New Bank, so she took it out directly. Gerald didn't want to expose these things, which had something to do with his career as a watchman for so many years. Of course, if it was exposed, it would not matter. Since he had returned to Sacramento for investigation, it was not a big deal to show his strength. When Henley said, "diamond card," he was trembling with shock. The card of New Bank was very popular among the rich. Henley naturally had one, but his card was the most basic silver card, which anyone could gain if he deposited $160,000. Henley was a capable man. After graduation, he took over 3 small companies under the arrangement of his family. It was not a big problem for him to get about $160,000 a year. Beside him, Kian also froze with shock. Like Henley, Kian also had a silver card. To some extent, it was a symbol of entering the rich circle. Apart from that, Doreen's beautiful eyes were also filled with shock. She was speechless with shock, gaping at that azure card. This was a diamond card. New Bank only issued a total of 9 cards. Even the entire Cauchy family, or the wealthy families in Sacramento, did not have such a card. The only person she knew who had a diamond card in New Bank was a respected old man in Sacramento. Moreover, that old man was not from a wealthy family. But in Sacramento, no one dared to provoke that old man. Everyone greeted him politely. She did not expect Gerald to have a diamond card. For a moment, many thoughts emerged from her heart. Doreen wondered, the previous Gerald couldn't have a diamond card from New Bank. Then how did he get a diamond card? Was there a big shot in the prison who gave it to Gerald? Maybe. As she thought about it, she suddenly remembered what Gerald said to her when she asked Gerald to grab a cup of coffee at the coffee house. Gerald said that he would help her not marry Henley. At that time, she thought that Gerald was going to do something illegal, such as kill Henley. But now, since Gerald had the diamond card of New Bank, ads by Pub Future, perhaps Gerald could help her out openly. She had encountered a problem with her family business. If she had the financial support of New Bank, it would be easy for her to overcome this problem. Then her eyes flashed a little as she thought of this. However, apart from them, most of the students present, including Jacob, stared at Gerald blankly. Most of them had not come into contact with New Bank. Some people might have heard that only rich people would go to that bank, but they didn't know the bank card rating system of New Bank. Rhoda could not help but ask, what is diamond card? Next to her, a person who knew the bank better said, it is the Chestershire top grade card of New Bank. Anyway, you can't get it with money. Moreover, I heard that with that, you can do many things with the support of New Bank. You can mobilize a lot of funds in the bank. Really awesome, someone exclaimed. But how could Gerald have this card? Rhoda looked at Gerald and sneered. Gerald, where did you steal this card? Hearing this, Jacob got furious. Rhoda, don't go too far. He is a rapist. Isn't it normal for him to steal things? Rhoda said disdainfully. He has been in prison for 9 years, and everyone knows that he has been driven out by the Kenneth family. How can he have such an expensive thing? Many people agreed with Rhoda and felt that it was too inconceivable for Gerald to have this thing. Jacob was even angrier. Gerald pulled his arm before Jacob said something. Jacob, don't argue with this kind of person. She is ugly and fat. She even thinks that she's a beauty. Interesting. A flood of anger welled up inside Rhoda. What did you say? Gerald had vaguely said that she was ugly before. Now, Gerald was practically directly made a fool of her. Her fingers trembled as she pointed at Gerald with a red face. Bang, bang, bang. There was a sudden knock on the door. Kian frowned, walked over, and opened the door of the room. Immediately after, he changed his expression and hurriedly bowed. Mr. Hanson. Standing at the door was the one-armed Leandro. He glanced at Kian and asked in surprise, you are Doreen's classmate. As he spoke, Leandro looked toward Doreen. When he saw Gerald, his expression changed slightly. However, he tried to calm down. Then he continued to look at Doreen. Doreen, I can't go to your engagement party tomorrow. I was having a meal with a friend in this restaurant just now. I heard my assistant say that he saw you. He said that you were holding a high school reunion here. I just wanted to take a look. Doreen quickly stood up and bowed to Leandro. You must get a full schedule in Universe Group. Just send me a message. You don't have to say it yourself. Leandro smiled. All right, I won't disturb your gathering. As he spoke, he looked at Gerald and Jacob with a smile. Kid, have you recovered? Jacob quickly replied, yes. Smiling face, casual date is just a click away. Sign up and start meeting women in your area today. Leandro chuckled, it's good that you have recovered. Remember to bring your ID card and employment materials on Monday. Okay. Jacob was still a little reserved in front of such a big shot in Sacramento. However, when this conversation happened, everyone in the room widened their mouths again. Kian thought, is Jacob really going to work in Universe Group? It's personally confirmed by the legendary one-armed president in Sacramento. Previously, Jacob said that the president personally interviewed him, and this was not a lie. Kian's eyelids twitched violently a few times. He was a low-impact leader in Universe Group. However, he wasn't qualified to speak to Leandro for so many years. Leandro had always been meticulous in the company. When he spoke to Jacob just now, he was extremely friendly. What the hell was going on? Kian was dumbfounded. Leandro did not care about this much. Then he beamed. Alright, I have to go. You guys have fun. I've already paid the bill for you guys. Everyone swallowed hard. This was a place that was around $500 per person. There were over 20 people. It meant that it would cost over $10,000. However, it must be a piece of cake for Leandro. Mister, just as Leandro was about to leave, Gerald suddenly said, Hanson, look at this classmate of mine. Can he go to work at Universe Group? Leandro was stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and looked at Benning, whom Gerald pointed at. Benning was also shocked and a little nervous. He looked around and said, I can't enter Universe Group. Only talented people can enter. I'm just Hey, Leandro hurriedly said. This guy is honest. I like this kind of person. You come with Jacob on Monday. As for the position, well, the manager of the marketing department. Annual salary. Speaking of this, he quietly glanced at Gerald and asked in a puzzled tone, $160,000. Gerald nodded slightly. Leandro heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Alright, $160,000 per year. Come with Jacob on Monday. Beside him, Kian was filled with shock again. He had worked so hard in Universe Group for so many years. It was not easy for him to get the position of the market manager. Now, was Benning on the same level as him? Others also widened their mouths and eyes in shock. What the hell? With just a glance, Leandro gave Benning a job worth $160,000 per year. All the people froze with astonishment as if rooted to the spot. Longface, this man glared at Gerald. This man was Doreen's brother, Amo. Doreen noticed the noise too. Her expression changed the moment she saw Amo. Doreen said, Gerald, run quickly. I will contact you online later. However, Gerald had the least intention for the flight. He stood up, put his hands in his pockets, and watched that group of men coming. Doreen became aghast. She quickly got up, pulled Gerald by the arm, and said, Gerald, run. Gerald ignored the warning from Doreen. He looked at that crowd of men, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The moment Leandro appeared, everyone forgot about Gerald's diamond card. The diamond card was something they couldn't get in their lives. However, they witnessed with their eyes what happened to Benning and Jacob. That was Universe Group, a company that countless people wanted to join. Now, with just a few words, Benning joined it and his annual salary was $160,000, which was the same as Kian. This made many people have expectations. They hoped Gerald could mention their names so that Leandro could notice them. Maybe Leandro would think they were useful and recruit them. An annual salary of $160,000 was perhaps a lifelong goal for them, but in a big enterprise like Universe Group, basic managers could get it. Now, a person with an annual salary of $160,000 was right in front of them, and it was only because of Gerald's few words. A minute ago, Benning was just a delivery man, and they looked down on him. This change was too big. They thought of Jacob, who was personally interviewed by Leandro. How much was his annual salary? And what was his position? Kian thought of this. He looked at Jacob and thought in shock. Is Jacob's position higher than mine? However, Leandro did not continue to ask the others. He smiled and waved his hand. You guys have fun. I have to go. After Leandro left, everyone was disappointed. They quietly looked at Benning and Jacob with jealous looks on their faces. They felt that the two were in good luck and had made a meteoric rise. Gerald, who caused all this, kept silent. He smiled slightly, picked up his fork, and began to eat. Benning still had a look of disbelief on his face at the time. He looked at Gerald and asked, "Gerald, is Mr. Hansen joking? How could I have the qualifications to work in Universe Group?" Kian agreed. He roared in his heart, "Yes, you are fucking not qualified. You are just a delivery man. You shouldn't be on equal footing with me. But now that Mr. Hansen personally appointed you, you are on equal footing with me." Damn it. Benning's words made other people even more jealous. Doreen looked up and said, "Benning, don't worry. Leandro is not joking. Go back and prepare the materials. When the time comes, you can go with Jacob to go through the employment procedures. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future." Andrew stood aside in embarrassment. He dejectedly returned to the table, looked at Kian, and said, "What the hell is going on? Jacob is capable, but how can a fool like Benning be a manager? How do I know?" The more Kian thought about it, the more annoyed he became. He picked up his fork and ate. The delicious food was now a little tasteless and even a little bitter. After a short period of shock, everyone began to chat again. They ignored Benning and Jacob before, but now they began to toast and congratulate them. A few pretty girls even friended Benning online. They were unwilling to look Benning in the eye before. Everyone was realistic, but no one paid attention to Gerald. Even after his diamond card appeared, most people believed what Rhoda said and felt that Gerald had probably stolen it. Audrey glared at Gerald and said in a low voice, "It must be this guy again." Hazel and Kira also knew that it was because of Gerald that Jacob and Benning could join Universe Group. But they did not say anything. After Benning joined Universe Group, Kian felt extremely embarrassed, and the gathering became a little boring. The purpose of Kian organizing this gathering was to show off how well he was doing. Things went in this way in the beginning. Many people envied him, but now, Benning and Jacob had become the focus of this gathering. This made Kian feel uncomfortable. Originally, he planned to organize something fun in the afternoon after this gathering. But now, he was not in the mood at all. After the meal, Kian said that he had something to do and left with Dia. Since the organizer left, the others followed suit. Benning was very happy. He looked at Gerald and said, "Gerald, thank you. If not for your reminder, I wouldn't have had this job. But I will repay your kindness next time. I have to go back now and tell my parents this good news. If they know that I can work at Universe Group and the annual salary is so high, they will be overjoyed." Gerald smiled. Benning was not a bad person. After Gerald returned to Sacramento, Benning was the only person who showed goodwill aside from his parents. It was not a big deal to help Benning. After everyone left, Audrey glared at Gerald and said, "Gerald, tell me, what is the relationship between you and Mr. Hansen? Don't think that I don't know. If you didn't remind Mr. Hansen just now, he wouldn't have the idea of letting Benning join his group. When the annual salary was mentioned, he also looked at you secretly." Gerald touched his nose and said, "Come on." Doreen looked at Gerald and said, "Gerald, chat with me alone. I have something I want to talk to you about." When Audrey heard this, she glared at Gerald and said, "You are always secretive, but sooner or later, I will find out everything about you. Go ahead. You can do it now. Pick a hotel and let's learn more about each other," Gerald said with a smile. Audrey blushed and hurriedly said, "You bastard." Gerald smiled and told Jacob something. Jacob took a taxi and left. Kira and the other two also gave Gerald and Doreen some time to be alone. The three of them took a taxi and left. Doreen took out her car key, pointed it to the car next to her, and pressed the button. "Get in the car." Gerald looked at her pretty face and had an inexplicable feeling. He opened the door and took the front passenger seat. Treasure Store's backyard, all antiques, Los Angeles. In the backyard of the treasure store, there were 5 people. They were Mary, Irene, Vivian, and Mike. And in front of them sat Donovan with a mustache. With a magnifier in his hand, he was carefully checking a saber. The hilt of the saber looked ancient, but the blade was shining brightly and extremely sharp. The blade was about 0.6 feet long. It was the shorter one out of the two sabers that Gerald had left in the Everett's place. The Everett family felt that these two sabers were treasures, and did not intend to return them to Gerald, so they planned to sell them. To sell this saber, they brought Mike, the most knowledgeable person in their family, with them. "How is it? Is this saber valuable?" Mary asked anxiously. Clang. Donovan inserted the saber into the scabbard and said with a frown, "This saber is sharp, but it is made from modern technology. I only want antiques. The hilt looks a little old, but it is not worth much money." Mary and Irene were slightly stunned. Mike hurriedly said, "Take a closer look, Mr. Cullen. I have never seen such a sharp saber in my life. It can cut stones easily." Donovan smiled and said, "How about $16,000? I will take it." "You must be kidding," Mike said. "This saber is more than $16,000. Indeed." Just then, someone chuckled. "A saber that can cut stones easily must be a world-famous treasure." The four looked over and saw that not far away, a man in his 40s wearing a gown walked over with a birdcage. Donovan cleared his throat and looked at the middle-aged man, but he did not dare to say anything. The middle-aged man said happily, "What saber is this? Let me have a look." When Mary heard this, she was delighted. She quickly handed the saber over and said, "Please." The middle-aged man smiled. However, when his eyes fell on the saber, his pupils shrank slightly. Especially when he noticed the symbol on the hilt, he was shocked. After a few minutes, the stranger slowly let out a breath and said, "What a good knife." Mary and her companions were happy. Mary asked, "How much is it worth? Do you want to sell this knife?" The middle-aged man put down his bird, looked at Mary, and asked seriously. Mary nodded and said, "Yes, I do. If so, I will pay you $800,000. The middle-aged man said with a smile. This offer astonished Mary and her companions because $800,000 was quite a large sum of money for them. Donovan changed his expression slightly. He knew that this valuable knife deserved a higher price. However, he didn't dare to open his mouth after one glance at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man said, "Based on what I know, this knife should have a companion. If you have a long knife at home and can sell both to me, I will pay you $3.2 million. $3.2 million. This offer made Mary tremble with excitement. She instantly said, yes, I have a long knife at home. I didn't expect them to be so valuable. I left them in the lumber room. I will go home to bring you that knife now. What do you think if I go with you?" The middle-aged man said with a smile. "I will pay you the moment I get the knives." Good. Mary said. She had never seen so much money in her life. This offer was beyond her imagination, so Mary accepted the proposal. Without hesitation, Mike wanted to raise the price but acquiesced since Mary had said so. The middle-aged man lowered his head and picked up his bird. Right then, a faint golden lotus tattoo appeared on the back of his hand. This man was a golden card assassin, better than a red card assassin. The middle-aged man chuckled. When he left with Mary and the others, a hint of killing intent flashed in his eyes. Gerald did not know that Mary tried to sell his weapons. He would be mad if he learned that Mary intended to sell his weapons at Smiling Face Casual Date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. The price of $3.2 million. His two knives were priceless. These weapons looked similar to the ones used by watchmen, but there were essential differences. These two knives couldn't be defined in terms of money. However, Gerald thought that he had lost his weapons a long time ago. Right then, Doreen drove around the city with Gerald in her car. Soon, Doreen stopped before high school. This was Sacramento No. 1 High School. Gerald and Doreen had once studied here together. It took Gerald by surprise that Doreen would bring him here. "Get out of the car." Doreen parked the car and looked at Gerald as indifferently and elegantly as before. Gerald touched his nose, got out of the car, and followed Doreen into the school. Gerald and Doreen walked on the large playground as before. Back in high school, they walked around the playground a few times after lunch and supper. Gerald would amuse Doreen with something funny back then. However, things weren't how they used to be now. Both Gerald and Doreen remained silent. After 2 rounds, Gerald couldn't help coughing and then said, "So embarrassing." Doreen paused, looked at Gerald, and then burst out laughing. Doreen looked beautiful with a smile. However, Doreen seldom smiled now. Gerald scratched his head. Doreen smiled for a while and then sat on the ground. Gerald, who was still standing, looked down and saw the beautiful scenery through Doreen's collars. Gerald couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He looked away, before Doreen realized his embarrassment. Doreen sat on the ground, clasped her hands around her knees, and looked into the distance. "Tell me what happened to you in the past 9 years. Smiling face casual date is just a click away." With a slight frown, Gerald pondered and then muttered, "I can't tell you what happened in the first 6 years. I didn't go to jail. Anyway, later, I lost my memory after an injury, and then a man saved me in Los Angeles. I married his daughter and became his son-in-law. I divorced not long ago. You must have heard of this." "So, you were falsely accused, weren't you?" Doreen asked. "You didn't rape Bree, did you?" Gerald curled his lips and said, "I don't want to explain this matter anymore. I can do nothing if you don't trust me." "I trust you," Doreen said. "I always feel that you are kind. I don't think that you would do such a terrible thing. That's why I asked you out in Los Angeles. However, I have my doubts because there was evidence in the surveillance video from the hotel. It was you who helped Bree into the hotel." Doreen gritted her teeth. "Therefore, I have to suspect you. My opinions are contradictory." Gerald took a deep breath. He sat next to Doreen and said, "I came back to Sacramento to prove my innocence. I was framed." Doreen paused, tilted her head, and looked at Gerald. "It may be dangerous." "Dangerous," Gerald thought. Gerald smiled and thought, "If I can't tackle these people, how can I live up to the reputation of watchman no? 0. Since Gerald fell silent, Doreen asked again, "Gerald, are you sure that you can stop Henley from marrying me? I thought you would do silly things. However, I saw a glimmer of hope when you took out that diamond card. You know that I do not like Henley. I hate him. I promised to help you in Los Angeles. I am always as good as my word." Gerald nodded with a smile. Doreen gritted her teeth as if she had made an important decision. Blushing, Doreen looked up at Gerald and said, "Gerald, if you can stop Henley from marrying me and help our family pull through, I will be your girlfriend." "What?" Gerald was taken aback. He did not expect Doreen to make such a proposal. Gerald turned his head, looked at Doreen, and saw blushes all over her beautiful face and neck. Gerald opened his mouth when there came the noises caused by cars. 4 or 5 cars stopped outside the playground. After the car doors were open, more than 20 people came out of the car. Most of these men were dressed in black. All of them held baseball bats in their hands. After getting out of the car, these people looked at Gerald and then marched toward him. The man in the lead, who had slicked his hair back, was tall and sturdy. He led the way with a baseball bat in his hand. The group of people on the opposite side walked faster and faster. Amo was gnashing his teeth and his whole body was tense. His sleeves were rolled up, and his thick right arm was holding the baseball bat tightly. The veins on his arm were bulging, and he walked faster toward Gerald. Doreen's face was pale at this time. She knew Amo well, and also knew how much Amo hated Gerald. In these 9 years, he had always mentioned Gerald. When he, smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Was with Bree, he always blamed Gerald for not protecting Bree. Well, Doreen knew that if Amo saw Gerald, Amo would not let Gerald go. She did not know how Amo knew that she was in school and how he came to her. At this time, she had no time to think about this. She pulled Gerald and said loudly, "Gerald, run, run." Gerald was still standing there. He had warned Amo once. Did he not have the slightest bit of resentment towards the Cauci family? 9 years ago, the Cauci family was ruthless to him. Both the head of the Cauci family and Amo wanted to kill Gerald. If he had not been discovered by Night Watch, Gerald couldn't get out of prison for the rest of his life. It was life Imprisonment. When Gerald returned to Sacramento, he did not think of taking revenge on them. Logically speaking, the evidence of what happened back then was conclusive, and the victim was their member. They believed that Gerald committed the crime. So it was normal for them to take revenge on Gerald. However, not taking revenge on the Cauci family was Gerald's limit. This did not mean that he wouldn't retaliate when the Cauci family targeted him. Amo came over faster. When he saw Doreen pulling Gerald, the anger on his face increased, and his speed turned higher. He trotted over. Without saying a word, he rushed to them and directly smashed the baseball bat toward Gerald. He did all of this without any word. He didn't waste his breath with Gerald and directly hit him. After hanging up the phone, Gerald put up a sneer. This was his biggest strategy to prevent Henley and Doreen from getting engaged. The reason why the Cauci family wanted Doreen and Henley to get married was that they wanted to use Henley's family business. There were some problems with the Cauci family's business. Or rather, the Zimto family was competing with them. The Cauci family had no choice but to cooperate with the Zimto family, so marriage was the best solution. When the Zimto family was busy with their own industries, and there was a huge problem with the cooperation between them and the bank, would they still have the mood to hold this engagement banquet? The answer was obviously no. As for how the Cauci family looked for a way out, it was none of Gerald's business. Now that Gerald had done all this, he was only waiting for the Zimto family to be in a mess overnight. Would they still have the mood to hold the engagement banquet tomorrow? It would probably be temporarily cancelled. After a period of time, the Cauci family would find that there was a huge problem with the Zimto family, then they would not marry Doreen to Henley. Unfortunately, Gerald could not see Henley's flustered look. But Gerald was not in a hurry. Since Henley's family had a certain relationship with Blood Lotus would not watch the Zimto family fall. Gerald would definitely participate in places with Blood Lotus. There were a lot of dealings with the Zimto family. Gerald touched his nose and a smile appeared on his lips. He now had two most important things: searching for information about Watchman number 2 and proving his innocence. Just as Gerald was about to leave the school, suddenly, a group of 9 people was walking toward Gerald. Most of them were wearing the uniform of security guards, while the other was a bald man with glasses. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s. Sir, it was this guy who was fighting on the playground just now. A security guard pointed at Gerald and said. Gerald was stunned for a moment and cursed in his heart. Doreen and the others drove away smoothly. Now, Gerald was caught alone. The principal of the school was no longer the same person. He looked Gerald up and down and said in a low voice, "Who are you? Why are you coming to our school? Put your hands up, or I will call the police." "Sir, I am here to relive my old days. And I am the one who was bullied just now. It has nothing to do with me." Gerald spread his hands and said, "Catch him and send him to the constabulary." The principal said in a low voice. The security guards did not say anything and directly pounced. Smiling face casual date is just a click away. Ads by Pub Future. Toward Gerald. Gerald was extremely troubled. He could not do anything to these people. He sighed and fled the scene. His speed was so fast that in almost an instant, he passed through the crowd. The security guards did not even touch his hair. Gerald ran over, turned around, and said, "Principal, the one who hit me just now is called Amo. You should investigate him. It is best to capture him and put him in jail for a few days." After that, Gerald turned and ran away again. How can this person run so fast? The principal looked at Gerald's back and cursed. The principal heard Amo's name, and his expression changed. Then he looked at the security guard and said, "Go and check if the school lost anything. Also, don't spread this matter." The Cauci family was not someone he could afford to offend. Gerald ran out of the school gate and stopped at the entrance. Suddenly, he saw a stall next to him and his expression changed slightly. "This stall is still open." Gerald was slightly surprised. This stall was very small. It was a stall selling pancakes. It had been here since Gerald entered high school. At that time, it was 40 cents for one. Gerald would come to buy one every noon. He didn't expect that after 9 years, the stall was still here. Because it was already afternoon and the students were in class, there was no one at the stall. Gerald walked over, and a middle-aged woman was sitting there playing with her phone. "How much is one pancake?" Gerald asked. 40 cents. She did not look up and looked at her phone. "The same price as 9 years ago. Did you not raise the price?" Gerald smiled. Only then did the middle-aged woman put down her phone. She looked up at Gerald and frowned slightly. She felt that Gerald looked a little familiar, but she could not remember who he was. There were too many students buying pancakes from her every day, let alone people from 9 years ago. The price must be economical for the students to afford, the middle-aged woman said. Gerald muttered, "I'll buy one." As soon as he finished speaking, a pleasant voice rang out from the side, "I'll have one pancake, please." Because the voice was pleasant, Gerald could not help but look to the side. When he saw it, he was stunned. Behind him, a beautiful woman in a black dress was walking toward him with a book in her hand. When she saw Gerald, she was stunned and asked, "Is it you?" In Cherry Garden, Los Angeles, where Irene lived. At this time, Mary, Irene, and Vivian were lying on the sofa. The three were trembling and their faces were full of cold sweat. Irene and Vivian's faces were full of fear. In front of the TV set in the living room, Mike was lying there. He covered his thigh and kept retreating backward. At this time, his body was full of blood. Especially his thigh, blood flowed like a fountain. At the same time, in front of them, a middle-aged man wearing a coat held a dagger in his hand. His face was kind and calm. He asked with a smile, "Are you still not willing to say how you got these two knives?" When he returned to Irene's home, he asked Mary and the others how they got these two knives. For the sake of money, Mary wouldn't say that it was from Gerald. She insisted that it was passed down from her ancestors. Then, the middle-aged man suddenly took out a dagger. In the blink of an eye, he stabbed Mike several times. Irene and the other two had their mouths closed. They didn't dare to speak. Just now, when they were screaming, Mike was stabbed again. Mary trembled and said, "If you want this knife, just take it. We don't want money." Between life and money, she finally chose money. At this time, Mary hated Gerald to death. She did not expect that after Gerald left, these two knives actually brought disaster to her family. "You don't seem to understand what I said. Let me tell you again. Do you know who these two knives belong to?" The middle-aged man pulled a stool over and sat down. Then he teased the birds on the ground and asked, "We don't know." Irene was trembling. The middle-aged man smiled. It was fine if he didn't know. He continued to ask, "I will ask you one last time. How did you get these two knives? If you don't say it, he will die." Mary gritted her teeth. She hurriedly said, "It was from my previous son-in-law, Gerald. He was injured 3 years ago and was saved by my man. Then, these two knives were hidden by my man. However, he has divorced my daughter. There is no relationship between us." Son-in-law. The middle-aged man got up and picked up the two knives on the coffee table, one long and one short. He said, "I was wondering why young master died in a small place like Los Angeles. It turns out that night watchman number 0 is here." He smiled and said, "The three of you, come with me." He pointed to Irene and the other two. "Oh, by the way, act normal. Go downstairs and get in the car. If you dare to do anything, you will die. I won't be merciful. He really has no contact with us. I don't know where he is now. I can't contact him at all," Mary said with a sad face. The middle-aged man glanced at her happily. Then he looked at Mike on the ground and said, "Find a way to contact the owner of these two knives and ask him to come to Sacramento to find me. I'll give him 3 days. If he can't find me, he can only receive 3 bodies." Irene and the other two turned pale in an instant. They just wanted to sell those knives, but they never expected a disaster to befall them. The middle-aged man picked up the two knives again and looked at Mary and the other two with a smile. "Beautiful ladies, let's go."